Hey everybody, it is Dean Z speaking to you from Jeffries Hall at the University of Michigan Law School. I'm with Dustin Johnson, who just got back from a longer than, typical 2-day vacation, and we're so glad to have him back. You didn't even know he was gone because he's so magical. Social media just kept going without him, but so glad he's back. Okay, I'm excited to talk to you today because I got an email from a watcher/listener with a question, and I felt like it was really good for two different groups of people. Personal statement question. He writes, I am a disabled veteran of the Iraq War, and I've had experiences that most applicants, I suspect, have not had. And I worry that in writing about them, I run the risk of alienating my audience. I'm not quite sure how to formulate a specific question about conveying difficult subject matter into application essays, so I am attaching the latest revision of my personal statement in hopes that I, Sarah, Dean Z, will read it, blah, blah, blah. So you may think, how is this going to be useful to me if I am not a disabled veteran of a war? Well, kids, it's going to be useful, and I'll tell you why. Because most people do not have stories that involve anything that heavy, that dramatic. And in talking about how to handle that kind of topic, it is also going to shed light for people who don't have topics like that to deal with. Okay, it's just also, frankly, it's a helpful perspective for all of you to have when you're thinking about, well, what topic, how should I handle my topic? And I'm always saying, don't be dramatic. Like, this is the context that I'm reading applications in, that there are people like that in the pool, right? So if you are writing about, and this is a real thing that happened once, the most dramatic thing that happened to you was when you didn't get a car for your 16th birthday. Serious topic once. Think about how you're presenting that, have some perspective. So I think it'll be useful whether or not you have something difficult to write about. Okay. Anyway, I wrote back to this person and I said, are you okay with my reading and critiquing your personal statement in real time? And he said, yes. So let's do it. It's only a page and a half, and I'll be stopping at points to break it up and make observations. So let's get started. As an infantryman at the height of the Iraq War insurgency, I faced moments where the line between life and death quite literally came down to split-second decision-making. Pause to say, great beginning, great hook, I'm ready to read. I have taken lives in war, as I have consciously chosen not to. The former events in defense of my comrades, and the latter in defense of civilians in contravention of Army doctrine. Again, I'm still intrigued. I will say that's a little, this is not about dealing with difficult topics, but I will just say that's a lot totally fluidly written. I had to kind of stumble over, what did you mean as I have consciously chosen not to? What he meant was I've done it and I have not done it, right? So it's a nice, I like that rhetorically, but I think that could be smoothed out a little bit. Those moments, both the ones characterized more by action and others more by restraint, taught me more about justice than any book ever could. I'm going to also pause again. I hope I'm not being tiresome with all these pauses. Again, this is a very technical matter. This sentence has more 3 times in a row, and you're just starting to stumble over it by the 3rd time, so maybe a little edit to not repeat words so much. And also, I'm just going to say, taught me more than any book ever could. It's a bit of a cliche. I don't think it adds anything. I would just say, taught me an enormous amount, or whatever it is. They also taught me that power without principle is dangerous. That is why I want to go to law school, to move from protecting people with force to protecting them with law, reason, and restraint. Okay, so that sounds all very promising. And it sounds like we are going to lead into some specific story about how he learned that power without principle is dangerous. Okay, so far so good, right? Certainly it's he's introduced a difficult topic, but in no way has he done so that feels like he's being exploitative or even gruesome, right? I'm not reading this and feeling like, oh, I can't continue reading this. So far so good. Next paragraph. Serving in combat exposed me to the stark consequences of failed institutions and lawlessness. I saw communities torn apart not only by violence, but by the absence of any trustworthy legal system through which to avoid it. When there are no stable laws, guns become the principal means of control. That harsh reality left an imprint on my mind that neither time nor emotional healing has diminished. I began then to understand how precious and fragile the rule of law is and how essential it is to the functioning of a just society. My military service made me value order, but also question what kind of order is worth defending. For me, the answer is one grounded in government accountability, individual rights, and due process for all, especially for those with whom we may take issue. Again, there's nothing wrong with this paragraph. It could be the first paragraph, and I guess that's what's wrong. We haven't moved any farther along in our story than what we heard in that first paragraph. Like it still feels like we are setting up the story, whereas I'm ready to dive in. I am ready to find out an incident, rather, that maybe taught him, whether it's I'm looking at the first paragraph where he talks about moments characterized by action and others by restraint. Whether it's an action or a restraint moment, I want to hear like a specific about what led him to these conclusions, right? This paragraph is fine standing on its own, but it's not taking us anywhere. And then he goes on. My path toward the law is also shaped by academic work in historical and comparative research. As a student of history, I've studied the evolution of justice across civilization, its change over time. I've explored how legal systems rise from the ruinations of war and how nations confront moral crises through the implementation of legal principle. That background helps me view today's legal debates, whether over civil rights, executive powers, or veterans' benefits, not in isolation, but as part of the larger human story. Law, I have come to believe, is both a mirror of our values as a society and a safeguard against our worst impulses. It is one of the few institutions that demand both analytical rigor and moral courage. Okay, I'm going to start my analysis here with another tiresome point, which is that last sentence. It is one of the few institutions that, he wrote, demand. One is the thing that's modifying demand, so it should be one demands. And it gets tricky because whenever you say one of the few institutions and then you have a plural there, your ear wants to make it as if it's plural. But remember, you're talking about one. So that's very tiresome. I apologize. Just one of those things to look for. But again, so now we've gone in a slightly different direction. Now we're talking about his academic background and how that has affirmed the intuitions he developed as from being in the infantry. And that is fine, but again, we're still not hearing anything specific. So if instead of the existing second paragraph, he had written something like a couple paragraphs like, here's what happened, here's a story that made me feel this way, and then move to like, this has just been driven home by my academic work, and that would be fine. But honestly, I wouldn't spend a lot of time about talking about the academic work, because that's not the most interesting part here. You know, the part of this story, of this person's story that is going to be specific to him and not easily replicable by others is about his time in the military. And whereas everybody who's applying has had some academic background. So I wouldn't say you shouldn't refer to it. I just wouldn't be making it a full paragraph, and I wouldn't be leaning on it. Okay, next paragraph. Becoming an attorney is, for me, a natural continuation of a life dedicated to service. In combat, I learned about the weight of authority, the cost of silence, and the need to protect those who cannot protect themselves. I just want to say, I feel like there's a story in here. The cost of silence, I'm very interested in that. What was the cost of silence? When were you silent? I want to know. Also, love that talking about life dedicated to service. That's a nice thing. Definitely like that it's still in there or being made explicit. But again, it's not the most interesting part of what this content could be, I think. In the courtroom, I hope to carry these lessons forward, not with a physical weapon. I don't think you need to say that, but you could say that. But with advocacy, discipline, and a deep respect for human dignity. I want to defend veterans. I want to argue for constitutional principles. I want to ensure the restraint is valued and that those in power are held to account for the abuses of it. I want to fight again, above all, for right action. I'm not sure what the phrase right action means, but other than that, I feel like this is like a perfectly good way to wind up an essay, but again, it just hasn't really moved us forward. It should be like this kind of generality after you've gotten into some specifics. And then there's one more paragraph that says, law school is not a deviation from my past experience. It is a step toward fulfilling it. I have served my country in one form. Now I want to serve it again by helping to ensure that justice isn't an abstract concept, but a living practice through which we all benefit. My experience with war taught me about consequences. My study of history taught me about proper context. The law brings them both together. This is where I want to be. So that, again, could also be a fine wind-up. I wouldn't use both of those. I'd, maybe make it into one paragraph, take some out, or choose one or the other. But I wouldn't have both back-to-back like that. So the real point here is here's someone who sounds like they have a few probably really gripping stories to tell. And I think we should hear more about that. I would maybe just pick one, maybe two stories, but not more than that. Like if they're illustrating very different things, I would maybe take two. I wouldn't take two that illustrate the same thing. And I would give me details, but I wouldn't, again, I would be sure to stay away from anything that is gonna be too upsetting. And maybe that is what the impulse was here. Like maybe we didn't get into specifics because the writer thought, I can't do that without getting upsetting. And so that's a challenge, but I would work on that. I would try really hard to figure out a way to get into specifics that are going to be easily digestible by a reader. And it definitely can be done, right? So that's your challenge. But don't keep it at this, 30,000 foot level that is itself abstract, which is one of the things he said he wants to get away from. He wants to be in law because it's not abstract. Give us specifics. And then for those of you, again, who don't have this kind of background that is impelling you to law school, those are all tips that you should be using too. Be specific, don't get too in the weeds, don't repeat yourself, and the strong opening, and I try to go for that. That was really powerful, the way this whole essay began. All right, I hope that is useful. Thank you so much, CB, for writing to us and asking or allowing me to read your personal statement to everybody. And I hope that's useful to you as well as to everybody else listening. All right, two more things. Grammar, but first, before grammar, there's also a YouTube question I wanted to address because I loved it. I taught myself how to write by reading authors from the 19th century or before. It was the prose I had. That's curious. That sounds like he was in prison and maybe only had 4 books or something. Anyway, so I want to know that story. But anyway, it's the prose I had. I've rectified this fault with time, but the style has stuck. Will readers believe that I am using my authentic voice if that authentic voice seems more fitted to some Victorian princeling than a really quite young adult? First of all, Victorian princeling, love it. Please work that into your essay somehow. I don't know. But I think this is a great question because we all, our writing is very much informed by our reading, right? And I, too, am a lover of 19th century English literature, and I have a lot of it in my head, and I'm sure it informs some of the more quirky parts of my writing. I think it's great that you're aware of it. So I would say, don't get like too deep in the Victorian weeds here. Stay away from some of the vocabulary that has really died and is no longer with us. Like one of the words that they loved in the 19th century was valetudinarian. Look it up. I might have used it already at some point in here. Anyway, don't use that word. Nobody says that word. So write however you want to write, and then go back and edit. That's what editing is for, right? Go back and take out the clunkiest phrases. And I feel like you'll know, right? Like I know when I'm writing something that I love, but is maybe a little pretentious. I know when I'm doing that. You probably do too. Just, gotta just be brave and take it out. Have someone else read it. Have them tell you if it sounds, too stiff. But as a general matter, the answer is that's not a problem. Write how you like to write. It will, this sounded very authentic, right? So it really does come off as authentic if it is truly your authentic voice. Okay, now, grammar. here's something you might not have thought of if you're not already a lawyer. Lawyers are sort of obsessed with punctuation and quotation marks in particular. We do a lot of quoting of law cases, right? So you may not have actually focused on the fact that there's two different kinds of quotation marks, like a curly one and then kind of a straight up and down one. And I actually had an alum write me the other day to ask me which I preferred. That's the kind of fun chat you can look forward to when you're a lawyer. I strongly prefer the curly ones. I think the up and down ones are a bit of an abomination. So that's, I just want to, you got to look, if you use the curly ones, you got to make sure that they're like one side's, like when they're at the front of the quote, there's a little bubble at the top, and at the end of the quote, there's a little bubble at the bottom, or not bubble, like a circle, I guess, a circle, right? So that's, you got to make sure you're doing that right. Check it out. And then also, this alum asked if I think there should be a space if you are quoting within a quote. You use a single quotation mark and not the double quotation marks for a quote within a quote. And he asked me, did I think there should be a space between the single, geez, come on. Awkwardly, I just want to say, the mic just fell down my dress, so where was I? The alum wrote to ask, did I think there should be a space between the single and the double? And honestly, I was impressed that someone had thought more about quotation marks than I had, because I'd never heard of this. Apparently, some elements of style books tell you to have a space between the two types of quotation marks. And I think that's going too far, okay? That's how much of a hippie living in Ann Arbor for 30-some years has made me. I say don't have that space. Just live your life, put them right next to each other, okay? Going out on a limb. All right. That's everything for now. I think I should get out of here before the mic falls again. So again, thank you to Dustin. So glad you're back. And please leave your questions below or send us an email to law.jd.admissions@umich.edu. Let us know what you think. Let us know if there's any way we can help. And that's everything, right? That's everything I have to say. Yeah, so wherever you go, go blue.